Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
2 nights before Halloween, a Dogman story, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, I have a werewolf or dogman story that's been passed down in my family for a few generations. My father and grandfather told it to me and my sister, and they told us the story had been told to them by my great-grandfather and grandmother, who were both gone before I was born. My great-grandfather and grandmother owned and ran a family farm until the day they died. My grandfather and father converted the property to a sort of a country estate. They call it a ranch, but it's basically manicured lawns leading to fairly wild little forests and a small lake that they put fish into from time to time. We also have a cave system on the property, or under it, and that's the only part of this land I ever was personally interested in. Ever since I was a kid, I was an amateur spelunker. I still have not explored all the caves, which I think extend past the edge of our property, although we have not officially yet mapped it out. I don't want to give out details about that because I would be identifying the place, and I want to keep this anonymous, at least for now. I have not asked the permission of any of my relatives to tell this story. This is only my point of view, but I'll try to get the facts straight as they've been passed down to me. On Halloween, everyone knows that the veil between the realities is supposed to become much thinner, but not everyone knows that the other side is supposed to be a lot more organized in their approach to this holiday than we are on this side. For instance, from their side, the veil is always pierced first by a vanguard, warriors who can open the portal and then guard it through the holiday, allowing safe passage here and back for things that we can't even begin to understand at this stage in our evolution. And it's not just that, but the holiday is different every year for them. The procedures and rituals differ, and we were warned, each generation of our family, that when Halloween falls on a Wednesday, beware the guardians of the portal. And the reason this story gets passed down in such an earnest way in my family is that there's a general agreement in all generations prior to mine that the portal, or the thinnest spot between the worlds, exists on our property. My great-grandfather, grandfather, and father all agreed that the portal between dimensions exists in a cave system underneath where we live. Now, the land has a natural spring on it, water that flows up from the earth. By the later 1950s, when the farm shut down, they had figured out how to use it to irrigate the garden. But back then, it was a spring that they would get water from using buckets, and the spring was located close to the main entrance of the cave system. Great-grandma would say a prayer of thanks when taking water, but would say an extra blessing around All Hallows for any spirits who may have been passing through the area. This time, 2 days before Wednesday Halloween, when she said her usual prayers and blessings, she was met with a sound of something growling at her from some unseen source. She finished her business as soon as she could and began walking back to the farm as quickly as she could without spilling water from either bucket she was carrying. Soon, the growling was coming from all around her, and she knew the woods were filled with hostile spirits on this day. If it wasn't that, then she was surrounded by a pack of hungry canines of some sort. No matter how you slice it up, she was in trouble. Eventually, her pursuers revealed themselves, slowly walking out into the path behind her, then darting away quickly. They were wolves, but the brightest and largest white wolves she had ever seen. They seemed unnaturally bright, yet they were not albino. Their eyes were as dark as night and sparked with emotion. She sometimes saw 3, maybe 4 of the creatures as they would trot out into the path, then zip behind a tree or dash from behind one bush to behind another. She thought there may have been many more of them, or perhaps just the 3 or 4, but she was terrified and had to mentally force herself to breathe slowly and keep walking toward home. As she came to the edge of the patch of trees and looked toward the farm, she saw her husband, my great-grandfather, and she called out to him. According to what my great-grandmother is supposed to have said, Great-grandpa grabbed his weapon and ran directly toward her, pointing it in her direction. He seemed to be aiming at her. She thought he had lost his mind, that perhaps he was enchanted by the wolf spirits who were menacing her. Unable to take the situation, when he used the instrument in his hands, she fainted right on the spot. The way my great-grandfather told it, however, was supposedly that after his wife called to him, he looked up and saw her at the edge of the trees, same as in her version of the story. But what she didn't know at the time, what she couldn't have known, was that standing just behind her, and apparently getting ready to grab her, my great-grandfather saw the wolves, the white wolves. He said there had to be 6 or 7 of them, and he said they were standing up on their hind legs and creeping deliberately toward great-grandma. He said he fired over their heads, and his wife fainted. The creatures retreated and watched from the woods as he came and carried her back home. Great-grandpa said they looked like wolves, but they were not wolves. They were spirits or sprites of some kind. He is supposed to have said they had the look about them of the most evil sort of fairies. And so, from that day forward, my family has had all sorts of precautions about years in which Halloween falls on Wednesdays, and one of the most off-limits of places would be the natural spring, and of course the cave system from which it emerges. The Monday before Halloween is as important a day as there is to my family. Halloween falls on a Wednesday this year, and I'm away at college thinking about my family and hoping that they are well. 2 days before Halloween, in a year in which the holiday falls on a Wednesday like this year, is a frightening time for us. The vanguard of a Wednesday Wednesday Halloween, or the most terrifying of all? In these years, the vanguard are what you would call dogmen. They tear through the veil, howling and barking and growling. Then they tear through the cave system and make a mess of anything in their path up above, while other vanguards will remain in hiding, guarding the cave and never harming anyone except in the most drastic of circumstances. The dogmen don't care what they destroy. They don't care if their howling draws attention to themselves, as they enjoy a fight and gain status in their tribe for being destructive. For this reason, I was never allowed near the cave system around Halloween all through my life. Not even on the non-dogman years. I was told to respect those people and to steer clear of them. I want it known that I do not believe one single word of any of this. I'm pretty sure the cave system on Halloween, or 2 days before Halloween, is exactly the same as it is on any other day of the year. I'm not saying I don't believe in multiple universes, since science and math say they are likely to exist. I'm also not saying I don't believe there might be something to Halloween being a special kind of time. I'm just saying I don't believe dogmen overrun our family cave on Halloween. I think there probably is some kernel of truth which started these stories, but that they must have been greatly exaggerated for a reason which most likely no longer survives. Perhaps believing these stories provided some kind of value to my family in the past, but I don't see how a remnant superstition can help us in the present or the future. One day, with luck, this land will be mine, and on that day, I will begin work toward a study and mapping of that cave system, and we will go there armed with cameras and recording equipment of every sort possible, and we will document what happens every single second on the day 2 days before Wednesday, Halloween.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Bigfoot, autumn migration, or year-round habituation, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, when I went away to college, my parents moved to a home out in the country. My mother wrote me that she heard people walking around her property at night and wanted to install an alarm system. Then, one night, she saw a Sasquatch staring into one of the house windows. I realized it wasn't people at all. I asked her what specifically she meant when she said she saw Sasquatch, and she described something that had to bend down to peer into windows that went up 9 feet in the air. Needless to say, I was alarmed at these reports and wondered if my parents were in danger or if my mom was going insane. When I spoke to my father, though, he corroborated her reports. They heard large people walking around the house at night, crunching the fall leaves, and there seemed to be spots outside of several windows where whoever it was would hang out and stare into the house while the two of them slept. Dad also mentioned that he had seen the silhouette of one of them once, and it was every bit as tall as Mom had said it was. I urged both of them to get out of there, but for some reason they thought it was kinda cool that a Bigfoot was interested in them. Talk about being desperate for attention. I was initially going to go home for that summer, but an opportunity arose for me to join an archaeological dig overseas, so that's where I spent the summer that year. My parents had no reports of Bigfoot for those months, and so they thought the creatures had moved on. When school resumed for me in the fall, the sounds of Bigfoot crunching all the leaves around my parents' house returned every night as well. Both of them decided the creatures must be nomadic, and they must pass through that area once a year in autumn through early winter, then leave. They hadn't heard them in the summer, and they never seemed to come around once snow was on the ground, so it seemed like a logical conclusion to draw. I really didn't want to visit their new home that year in the summer when college let out, but I couldn't line any better things up, so I ended up going home and visiting my parents in their no longer that new home. It seemed strange visiting them in this odd new location and seeing them so used to being there. It was a little heavy for me, realizing the home I had grown up in was completely gone, and that I would never get to be in my own room ever again. I had known this consciously for a couple of years, but I think a part of me was still always thinking of home as that place which was now owned by someone else and which I would never enter into again. So I was in a strange mood and spent most of my first week there sticking to myself and trying to find some paying work for the summer. One morning, I got up before dawn and started looking through want ads online. I was sitting in this room they have with large windows that looks out onto the lawn and the forest beyond. I think it was late June or early July, probably late June. As I was reading my laptop, which I literally had on the top of my lap, something drew my attention out of the corner of my eye. It was a large, dark figure moving in the trees. I turned and stared at the location but saw nothing. Going back to my work, I once again saw something move. This went on for a while. I would see something move, then look over, and everything looked normal. I thought that stress must be getting to me, and I searched even harder for a job. I needed an excuse to be someplace other than that house, and I needed some funding so I could get a room of my own somewhere, anywhere but in that creepy location. Don't get me wrong, the house is nice, and my parents are nicer, but that location is haunted by things that I wish I didn't have to know about. So, I finally got a job, and it required me to work a night shift. I'd be driving to work at dusk and coming home at dawn, but it paid fairly well, relatively speaking. On more than one occasion, when pulling into the driveway and the time just before the sky starts to light up, I was shaken to the core by the sight of some large shadow seeming to come to life and run away from me and the house. I'm saying it would look like there was nothing there but the house, the garage, the driveway, and some trees and foliage. Then, in the next second, one of the shadows would literally seem to come to life and sprint off towards the woods behind the house. These were 9, 10, 11-foot tall shadows. I knew what they were, and you do too. They were my mother's pet Sasquatches. They didn't just pass through in the fall. They were habituated on her property, and it was just that she only heard them when there were leaves on the ground. During the summer, they were too stealthy to make enough noise to be heard, and in the winter, apparently they were too smart to walk on snow and leave footprints behind for evidence. For this reason, my parents were both convinced that they had a migrating tribe visiting them seasonally. They didn't. They had an infestation of giant, primitive, proto-humanoids who could go feral any second and make them very sorry that they had allowed these creatures to habituate. This all happened 3 years ago. I finished that summer at home with my parents, but I've never returned since. They visited me for Thanksgiving this year. I won't ever go back to that place, and they won't listen to me that they are in danger. They also, for some reason, think it's a crazy idea that the Squatches live near them year-round. Why is that any crazier than a migration? It's shocking to me how people can get locked into beliefs and value them more than the eyewitness accounts of their own family members. Nevertheless, that's how the human nervous system seems to function. And that's why my parents and I can't agree about whether the Bigfoot on their property are part of an autumn migration or a year-round habituation.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Have you heard our secret sheep squash story? If you were a paid subscriber, you would have. I'm about to record a story that our subscribers will hear a full week before any of the rest of you. If you want to help support this channel, just go to peterbernard.com and click on the PayPal donation button. That'll let you in on the weekly extras. See you next time on Scary Stories.